My name is Sunny Ajmera, and I've been in the identity space for more than a decade. And over these several years, I've been building enterprise-grade identity solutions using SailPoint, ISC, and IIQ. In today's session, I will be talking about unified access approval experience with SailPoint IIQ integration with Microsoft Teams. During this session, you will see me walking through what's new in 8.5, what's the architecture of these integrations, what are the different components and prerequisites of this integration. And we'll also go over some of the configuration that's done on IQ side, Azure side, and then we'll go over the demo and the troubleshooting tips that I've learned, uh, during my experience with this integration. Now let's see what we have in the agenda. With 8.5, SailPoint has enhanced this integration, which means that now with 8.5, user can actually approve work items within Teams, because prior to 8.5, user will get the notification in Teams, but when they click on that notification, they will have to go and log into IIQ, which is again uh, a context switch for them. And again, it's not a seamless and a good user experience. But with 8.5, users can actually take action on the work items within Teams. So there's adaptive card approvals where you can see within the Teams what the request is about, who requested this, any comment on the request, and any attachment to the request. And there's also an embedded My Approval tab where you can see all your work items that are assigned to you, and you can expand them, you can collapse them, you can actually look at all the approval items one by one. So it's basically a copy of My Approval UI that's embedded within uh, Teams. Another enhancement is that SAML SSO is not an option. It's not an optional anymore. It is a mandatory requirement for this integration, just to give the user seamless experience. Whenever they click on a notification, they're automatically um, be able to take action on those work items. There's no need to re-log in or go to IIQ to log in and then take action on their work items. Another enhancement is that you can actually see auditing by channel. So when someone take an action on the work item through IQ Teams, there will be an audit event which will show what channel is being used to take action on that work item, and this way you can get some metrics around how is the adoption of the Microsoft Team integration in the organization, and you can actually get some metrics around that. Now, moving on to the architecture of this integrations, there are different components involved in this integration. So you have Microsoft Teams, which is your end client, and then you have a zone, which is, let's say, called Azure and Intra, where you have a lot of configurations for various integration pieces within this integration. And then you have a custom enterprise where you have your bot server VM, where you have your connector server VM, and where you have your IQ server VM. Now, within this Azure Intra, there are 8 components that you have to configure. Uh, and I will go over these components in detail in the coming slides. With respect to customer enterprise, nothing is exposed or public facing. So all the communication happens internally. There is no public facing. IQ is not public facing. Bot server is not public facing. Everything is internal within the private network of the customer. Now, Teams client, you can use this this integration on Teams web, Team desktop, Team mobile, and have a small video during the demo that shows you how you can actually how the experience looks like in Teams mobile for this integration. Now, just to give you some information about these different components. So you have connector application that you can see. This is being used to connect Azure Active Directory within SailPoint IQ, so that you can actually aggregate your users, entitlements, um, And you can also use this integration to pick risky user signals if you have the entity protection on. Now you have the connector group, which is your on-prem VM running, and that controls or it that controls the communication between these different uh, components. So it's more like a bridge between Azure, IIQ, and your enterprise. It just opens and outbound connections whenever a communication channel is needed to Microsoft and pull the traffic in. Now you have your SSO provider, which is again, as I said, SAML's SSO is a mandatory for this integration. So you have an SSO provider which you configure on Entra and also on IIQ to enable seamless single sign-on. So whenever someone clicks on a link in Teams, they're automatically authenticated and they can take the action on the work item right from the Teams. Now you have your SSO Entra app proxy. Now there are two authentication flows in this integration. One is the adaptive card, and another one is the My Approval tab. And we'll, you know, see how it looks in during the demo. But My Approval tab within Teams uses the SSO configuration because that's just just an external tab or UI that is that renders the My Approval UI within the Teams. Now, adaptive cards uses app SSO Intra app proxy, which is again different, and this communication is handled by the Intra app proxy because all the communication is internal, and Intra proxy exposes a public URL that interfaces the IIQ for all the communication. Now you have Teams applications, which is again the bot identity, and that's the configuration within this Teams application is heavily used in configuration. So you will see client ID, secrets, app ID, URI, application ID being configured on different components within Entra and also on SailPoint IQ side. Then you have app access application. Again, that is for the communication. Whenever bot needs to talk to SailPoint, it sends a request, and SailPoint validates that request based on who is the issuer, who is the audience, and then grants the token for the bot to communicate with SailPoint. Now you have another component is your chat app proxy, which again is used to to send messages to bot endpoints, and this is again used by SailPoint IQ. Now, moving on to the next one is how the approver sees the flow. Now, technically, when an access request work item is created or forwarded in IIQ posts that to a bot endpoint, which is /API/notify with the work item details. The bot translates that into an adaptive card and renders it to the UI using the bot framework. Now, the trigger is not just on whenever the work item is created. It can be on whenever the work item is forwarded or whenever the work item is reassigned to. Now, within the adaptive card, there are inline buttons. And if you click on those deny or approval buttons, it calls the app API message endpoints and then takes the action and then complete the work item or deny the work item based on the action that's taken. Now, this is completely different from how the My Approval tabs works and how the authentication works on that tab. Because that's a UI page, not a chat message. Now, on the step 2 and 3, based on what approvers click, whether approver clicks on approve or deny, as I said, it hits the /API/messages endpoint on the bot, and then that based on that the bot exchanges the SSO token and then gets the access token from IIQ and then updates the work item in SailPoint. Now, in step 4 and 5, IIQ, gets the response from the bot, validate that response, and then it backs the audit event, showing from which channel the action was taken. Now, let's dig a little more deeper and probably look at the process flow on how the approval actually works. Again, this is more an extension on how the approval flow actually works. Now, when the user clicks on approve button on the adaptive card, everything is invisible to the user from there. Everything is, done by the bot. So bot service code, which runs on the bot service VM, calls the bot framework token API. It requests a token from SS token for the user, and then that authentication uses the auth, while the one which is used by my approval is the SAML SSO. That's the difference between these two, authentication flow. That adaptive card uses OAuth for authentication, and my approval tab uses SAML sign-on for authentication information exchange. Now, once the access token has been returned, bot posts the actual API call to the slash API slash messages endpoint to IIQ, and that again goes through the private network to private network, and that's all the communications in this integration is within the network itself. So bot VM talks to IIQ server, and there's no proxy in between this call because everything is internal within the network and nothing is public facing. Now, once the message is received by IIQ parses that response and then updates the work item, based on what action has been taken on that work item. Now, in terms of validating the token, IIQ does use scope in terms of what's the object ID. It doesn't use the email address because email address for the user can change. So it does use Azure object ID to correlate identity in IIQ. And if there's no matching identity, you will see a 401 error. You will see an error, but if it matches, uh, then it correlates to the entity, and then approval is committed and audit event is logged. So again, that's where you will see the channel being flagged that it is from Microsoft Teams integration. And now once the approval is committed, audit event is logged, it returns success message to the bot, and then the card is updated showing as approved. Now this is the flow for the adaptive card. In terms of the flow for my approval, again, the only piece that's going to change is the SAML sign-on, since that is used for my approval tab. Now, moving on to the next set of configuration or prerequisites needed for this configuration. So there are a couple of prerequisites that's needed for this integration. So first is IIQ 8.5 has to be SAML sign-on enabled. This is again a prerequisite or mandatory configuration that's needed, and this enables the user to have a seamless single sign-on experience, and they are able to approve or take action on the work item within the team itself. Now, the bot service code that has to run on a separate VM from IIQ, it cannot be on the it cannot be on the same VM as IIQ, and the connector server also needs to run on a different VM. Again, all these separate VM have to be on the same network. And one of the lesson learned from doing this integrations couple of times is that on a couple of instances, or probably I think one or two, I did uh, had the bot service code and connector server running on the same VM, which kind of broke the private network routing, and had a lot of issues. So again, each of these components needs to be on their separate VM, and they need to be on the same private network. And in terms of Azure Entra ID, there's a lot of configuration on Entra ID side, but um, I like for most of the integrations, a SailPoint architect or engineer won't be doing those configuration. But at a high level, you need to have an Entra subscription with application proxy. Application proxy isn't enabled or licensed in every tier, so that's something that need to be verified. Um, if you're doing this integration on Azure side, you need to have a global administrator role, and also need to have a team administrator role so that you can install the IIQ app on the teams. Now, within network and runtime, uh, if you are using a self-send certificate, then you have to make sure that you are, you're not validating those certificates, else you will get an error. IQ stays internal. Only the proxy face the public internet. So that's where the Entra SSO proxy application comes into play, and that's create a public-facing URL for anti-IQ. Now, there's a few more application proxy for chat, um, uh, so that the communication between bot, IAQ, and connector service remain within the network. So that's where all these proxy applications come into play. Now, the next slide shows you what is the firewall and port requirements. Since all this communication is internal, there are couple of port that needs to be opened, or you need to have a firewall rule enabled or created for some of these communications. For example, the bot service runs on the private port for bot services 3978. The public port is 3988. Now, depending on what port you're running on your IIQ server, you need to have that um, configured. And same for the communication between bot VM, application proxy connector. Now, the only thing in terms of networking is, again, the bot service runs on 3978, 3988. These are private callback from IIQ. These are not exposed via app proxy. So it's again IIQ to bot to IIQ. That's how the configuration and networking should be enabled. Um, the only thing that's, again, as I said, internet facing is IIQ URL through application proxy. Uh, there needs to be two application proxy that are configured in this integration, which is again for bot VM. That's again the chat uh, application proxy, and then again for the IQ server, which is through SSO application proxy. I think other than that, nothing has to be accessible or reachable via the internet. Everything has to go through these proxies. Now, moving on to the configuration. Now, these are the 11 configuration steps that are needed to be performed in Entra and IIQ to get this integration working. Now, most of these are in Entra side. Some of these configurations are in IQ side, and we'll go over these in detail. Now, to start with, you need to have a connector app configured so that you can integrate Azure Active Directory within SailPoint IQ. And again, this is where you need to grant permission or get permissions to be able to read users, read groups, read directory, and and, uh, and everything about entity. And you can also read entry risk user signals within this connector app. So through this application, you generate a client ID and secret that you configure in SailPoint IQ, and then you aggregate your groups and users so that you can correlate when someone clicks on a work item through IQ, and then they can be correlated using object ID. Now the next one is connector group. You need to install the connector app proxy service. So it's an exe file that you run on a separate VM, and in that enables you to have a connector proxy so that everything can be, done through application proxy. Now, in my demo, I had only one connector server in the group, but in production, you will definitely want to have multiple servers for high availability. Now, the next bigger piece of configuration is the SSO intra app proxy. Now, through this configuration, uh, you allow SailPoint to be accessible without configuring firewall. So it lets you create an public facing URL for IIQ application, and this is what's needed when you click on My Approval tab. It does go through this application proxy and then do the SAML single sign-on to render all the approvals that are owned by individual user. Now this lets you this also lets you access uh, uh, IIQ within my approval tabs without the need to be on VPN. And I think this is one of the game changing enhancements from 8.4 to 8.5, that you don't have to be on VPN to be able to approve your work items within team. And this configuration lets you achieve that. Now there are few steps involved in this application proxy. You create a proxy, you configure SAML single sign-on on that, and then you enable Teams SAML. So there is a configuration object called Teams SAML where you configure what you have configured on Entra side in terms of what's your entity ID, what's your session ACS URL, and what kind of name ID format you are using. So everything has to match between this application and Teams SAML configuration in IIQ. Now I had I think during one of integration, I had an issue where the name ID format was incorrect in IIQ, and there was the reason why I had an error while trying to open my approval tab. So what was happening is that because of name ID mismatch, as soon as I click on my approval tab, the page does take me to the public facing URL of IIQ, but it doesn't render anything. And then as soon as I close it, I get authentication failed for this integration. So I think so you have to be very careful in terms of when you're copying any value, just make sure that it doesn't have any spaces, because it can lead to a lot of issues. Now the next one is API Access App. This configuration facilitate token-based authentications between Microsoft Teams and IIQ. So whenever API token request is made by the bot, IIQ checks for a specific variable within that request, like who is the issuer, who is the audience, and then based on the validation, it issues a specific access token that bot can use to communicate with IIQ. Whatever you configure within this Access app, you also configure in IIQ, or within IIQ you have authentication configuration where you specify the same configuration between API Access app and the IIQ. The next one is Microsoft Teams app that you create in an Entra. Again, this is the configuration that you do in this application is heavily used across different configuration item within Entra and also within IIQ. So this is very critical piece of the configuration. Now this configurations specify the scope of the integration. Now within this application, you specify authentication parameter, you specify client ID and secret, and appropriate Microsoft API permissions. And this application is also associated with the bot resources. So again, the value from this application are used to create and execute bot service code that runs on a separate VM, and I will go over the environment file, which has all the configuration that is needed to run the bot service code. Now, the next one is the Azure AD app in IIQ. Now, again, this one does use the connector app that we created in step one, where we created the client ID and the secret. And this one is again used to aggregate users and group within IIQs so that IIQ can correlate the Azure AD users using their OIDs. Now within this Azure AD app, there are a few more settings where you enable Microsoft Team notification. You specify the bot URL. You specify what's the team application ID, and there are a few more parameters that you specify in this Azure AD app that are critical for this integration. And there's another piece of configuration that's in the Azure AD application, which is the proxy uh, server IPs. So I think you need to define what are the connector server IPs that are used to establish the communication between different bot server between IAQ. So you need and the communication that's coming from only specified IPs are authenticated and validated by the communication, and the bot and the IQ. Any communication that's coming outside of those IPs will be rejected and the integration won't work. Now, the next step is the SSO provider app. Again, this is to facilitate the single sign-on between Teams and IAQ. This simplifies the login process without users, again, logging into IAQ. Now, the next one is chat app proxy. Again, this is very similar to Azure Inter Application Proxy, this facilitate the communication between Azure bot endpoints, the slash API slash messages, and notify and establish communication between Microsoft Teams application and Entity IIQ application. Again, this does go through app proxy, so everything is internal and everything is securely routed. Now, uh, the next configuration is the Azure bot services. So SailPoint does provide an exe file which is used to run the bot service on a VM, and that service does take environment variables in terms of how the configuration is done. What's the IQ service URL? What's the name ID format? What are the different application IDs that we have configured so far in Intra? So just to establish the communication and have the communication between bot to IIQ and vice versa. Now, the bot service runs has two ports. One is public and private, and in terms of configuration, we use the, the public port for communication. Um, Now, setup is for the bot services. It's an exe file, so you can run it, using a command prompt, or you can actually configure a Windows service to run that bot service. The bot service, when runs, does create a log file which can be used for troubleshooting purpose, and it does take the secret client secret, which have to be encrypted in order to establish secure communication. So the bot service does provide endpoints to encrypt those secret, and also you can also encrypt the certificate that is being used for the communication um, using the endpoint that's provided by the bot service. Now, so once you have the bot service up and running, you do have to create a manifest file, which is used to create a Teams application for IIQ. So again, the bot service does provide another endpoint to create that manifest file, um, and that creates a zip file, and that can be deployed on Teams. Now, the next step is installing Teams app. So again, like you need to be a team administrator to be able to install app. You can go to manage apps and then upload the app. You do have an option to like if you have to change any configurations, you do have an option to upload or update the app. Uh, the only thing is that once you update the app or you make any changes, you do need to restart the bot service. And I think that's one of the another troubleshooting tip is that for any change that you made to to configuration, you might need to restart the bot service. Uh, because sometimes Teams does a cache on the application. So in order to refresh the configuration, you might need to restart the bot service. Now, the I think the one thing I want to emphasize on this integration is that all these steps are sequential, and the sequence is non-negotiable. Each step, takes configurations and URL from the previous step. So if you somehow escape or you accidentally escape, you might run into problems. And I think what I learned is that as I start making configuration, I create an inventory or a table of where I keep all the different endpoints, all the different application IDs, client ID and secrets, and then that way it's handy, and I can come back, and then I can review my configuration. And the next table will actually show you some of the reference URLs and identifiers that are being used throughout the configuration. So you have IIQ internal URL, and as you can see, it's IIQ 85 is where I have my IQ hosted, and then there's the IQ public URL, which is exposed or via application proxy. So this is the application that's being URL that's being used by the Teams My Approval tab. So it doesn't use the the IQ internal URL. It creates a IQ public face URL which you can actually use. Now there's a session consumer URL which lets you single sign on. Then you have your bot service private URL. Again, it's the IP is where I have the bot service running, and that's the port where the public port for the bot service. There's also a bot service public URL. Then you have different endpoints where bot gets a message, bots get notified, and then you have your API access URL, which is used to request token and get token. Now, most of these are auto-generated when you start creating configuration um, on Intra. At least that's what I've seen. I don't know if there's an option to customize this, but these are pretty static. So, for example, like the API notify endpoint remains static. The API access URI, if you look at the format, it's API, then your app ID of the API access app in Intra, and then the anti-icon API. So some of these are static and doesn't change, and rest of these are like where you can fill based on how your environment is set up. Now, uh, moving on to the walkthrough. So um, this slide shows you how the adaptive card and the My Approval tab looks like. Again, these are mock-up. I just added in case I have some glitches in my demo. But if you can see within the adaptive card, you see what's being requested, who requested, any comment or justification for that request, and you have an inline action where you can click on approve or deny, or you can reassign it to someone else, and take the action immediately. Now, within My Approval tab, you see all the work items that are assigned to you. As I said, it's a a replica of My Approval UI within the team. So it's embedded within team, and use a single sign-on, and where you can actually see all your work items and take action accordingly. Now, before we go into demo, I do have a small video which shows you how the experience look like, yeah, on mobile, on Teams mobile. So let me. So So this is a recording that I did on my phone. So I logged into Teams, and I have these work items assigned to me, and um, I'm gonna click on one of the work item and then try to add a comment just to highlight that I'm approving this uh, using phone, and then click on add comment. And then you can see that the work item has been completed, and I can again expand and take action. So again, as you can see, I'm not on VPN. I am not being redirected to IIQ login. Everything is happening within team itself, so which is a very great user experience in terms of taking action. And for some of these, I'm just adding comment. I'm not taking action them immediately, so they will still remain in my queue. And again, I do have an option to prove it, deny it, and forward it to a work group if needed. So as you can see, I've completed all the work items that are in my queue, and everything has been completed. And once that's completed, you will definitely see an audit event capturing what's the mode or channel that's being used to approve this work item. Now again, this was pretty cool experience in terms of you can do it right through your teams, and that's how everybody is used to um, working these days. Now, moving on to the um, uh, uh, to the demo part. Let me log in to my VM, and then start creating a request in Icon and see how it actually looks on the desktop version of Teams. Now I might have my VMs deallocated, so let me, yeah, as I can see that one of my VM is stopped. So let me start the VM, and then we'll work on demo. So while see, again click on, okay. So the machine is started. As you can see, I have 3 VMs configured for this demo. So IIQ85 is running Teams, IIQ 8.5 version. The IIQ bot 01 is running the bot service, and then I have IIQ connector server, which is establishing private communication between IIQ85 and IIQ bot 01 server. Okay, so now the server is running. So let me RDP to the IQ box. No, so I might have to restart the Tomcat and MySQL service to have my IIQ up and running. So let me do that. So within my IQ demo instance, I have two sources configured. One is for Azure Active Directory, where I have users from Azure Active Directory, and that's what I'm going to use to create my access request. And then I have an HR source where I have a couple of identities with some basic information pulled into IIQ. Let me make sure that I am able to connect to my database before I restart. The database is up and running. I'm able to connect now. Let me restart. It does take a little bit of time to have IQ up and running. I think it could be something with the VM, uh, or how the services gets boot up in this VM. Now, while this is getting started, um, let me show you how this VM looks like. So as you can see, um, um, I have a virtual private network, IIQ85 VNet, and this is the same network that I've configured between these two other VMs that I have for bot and connector servers. So everything is, using the same virtual network. Um, I I I don't have any. When I let me show you the network settings. This is the private network IP address for IQ VM, and I do need a public AI to be able to remote into IQ VM. And now this is private IP address for bot server, and again, as you can see, this is using the same virtual network as IQ server, and then same goes for connector server. It's again using the same network, so everything is using the same network, and IQ connector server is facilitating the communication internally. Now let's see if the IQ is up and running. Okay, so the IQ is up and running now. Um, So I'm going to log in as a Spademan, and then I will try to create a couple of access requests for users whose manager is uh, is my identity. So now let me show you the IQ configuration. Now as you can see, I do have Microsoft Teams notification enabled here, and this is the bot URL. So IQ bot 01 is the host where the bot service is running. This is the public port 3988, and this is the 19154 is the team application ID that's created in Azure Entra. And then I have the tenant ID of my Entra environment. Then I have the bot ID, which is again Microsoft Teams application that's being created in Entra. Then I have the SSO app proxy ID. Then I have the bot secret, which is again the client secret that's created when I created the Teams app in Entra. Now, few other configuration in IAQ is definitely going to be the notification piece, where you have to enable the Teams notification. And again, for Microsoft Teams, there are different email templates. If you want to customize these or adaptive cards, so if you want to customize these, you can customize these. But that's the notification piece. Now, in terms of uh, the communication between bot and IIQ. So this is the piece where the configurations are copied from Entra, and this basically is the configuration. Whenever bot needs to talk to IIQ, it needs to request a token, and these are the same configuration that are configured on Entra. IIQ app API access app application. So you will see that it has the API key, it has the STS Windows.net, and then the TID is your tenant ID, and it's automatically translated. You don't have to provide a static value. So based on your tenant ID that's coming in the request, it's automatically translated, and OID is how identity is correlated within IAQ. So that's one piece of configuration. Now, the other piece of configuration within Azure Active Directory application is the proxy server, which I was talking about. Um, So this configuration is very critical in terms of that's how IIQ validate that request is coming from from connector server. So this is the connector server VM, and that's the the connector server. If you have multiple um, so this is the public IP and this is the private IP. So that's has to be added in order to establish a secure communication. So if the request is coming from a different IP not listed here, the request will be rejected and you won't be able to use um, IQ within Teams. Now there's another set of configuration which is for um, Teams SAML. Now, as you can see here, this is used by the My Approval tab. So you can see that there is a public URL that's created for IIQ, which is created through Microsoft Entra App Proxy application. So this is the public endpoint, and um, again, this is an entity ID that's configured. So all of this configuration has to exactly match what's configured in Entra side, and the issue that I was talking about is, that I had was that in the name ID format, I had space in between here. So it was something like this, which actually caused an issue. So, make sure that your configuration matches to what's configured. SailPoint does provide an out-of-the-box example rule that you can use in order for correlation and matching identity once SAML is passed to IQ. And this rule basically what it does, it just gets the tenant ID so that it can translate, and it actually looks for Azure applications for the tenant ID, and also if the name ID has @ then it searches for entity using email address. If not, then it actually try to get a link using the native identity. So in my case, OID is the native identity, so it uses that to correlate to identity in IIQ. There's another configuration which is in the system configuration, which is to enable Teams integration. So I think that's uh, so this is Teams enable. So you do need to mark Teams enables for different settings to be effective and to be available. Now, the another configuration is to enable single sign-on. So if you see, SEMS SSO is enabled within IIQ for seamless user experience. Again, everything that you configure on the SSO provider app comes here. So your entity ID, SSO login URL, your certificate, and the entity ID that you have created. So again, this is IIQ host, and and most of these is very standard configuration that we configure. So again, you just copy these configurations from what you have configured on the Entra side, and then you can have a seamless SAML enabled. Now, in terms of configuration on the Entra, there are multiple set of applications, as we see that needs to be created. For example, like I will just go over the SSO provider app, which we just saw on the IQ side. So this is to establish single sign-on configuration. So you can see on IQ, I had the same configuration, what I'm passing as the name ID and the certificate that needs to be copied into IIQ, and the same identity provider, login URL, identifier, and you can use this button to actually see if the seamless sign-on is working or not. Another critical piece is the app API access key. So there's again have a user.read permission, and also it does have a scope, and that's what being used, to get a token from IIQ. So it does, have this configuration in exact. And some of these do have API or bot ID. So again, the configuration has to be carefully copied into bot server configuration URL. And another important configuration is the Entity IQ Teams app. Um, so yeah, again, these has application proxy, which has a lot of configuration in terms of what connector group you're using. So again, this is the connector group that I have, and again, for some of these configuration, I'm not validating backend SSL because I have uh, uh, self-sync certificate enabled. So now we have IQ. So let me see maybe one or two user where I can actually request um, and see how that flows into. So now if I look for a user, um, I don't have a lot of users with team license, so it's only me. So let me create a request for Parker Scott, and let's see how that goes. I have couple of entitlements, and I'm gonna select two. I'm just gonna approve teams. I'm just adding a comment so that we can actually verify if it's being visible in Teams app or not. So I'm gonna submit. Now let's look at the access request. So it shows that it's waiting for me to take action. Now I do have Microsoft Teams application. So let's go back here. So as soon as I click on my approval, it does take me and does a SAML SSO using the public URL. Now, once this is done, you will see that the recent request shows up on the my approval. So I can again collapse them, expand them. I can sort, based on what's the oldest, what's the newest, and based on the priority. Let me do it by the newest. So as you can see, the comment that I added, so it's visible from here. I do have a old request where I actually added an attachment, so even that is visible and I can download. So this is the added by the requester. So again, you can do that. Again, you do have an option to approve all. So let's say I click on approve all for this one. So once this is done, so it's gone from my queue. Now for this one, I can actually deny, and I want to maybe add. Complete these. And for some of these, I will still leave them as is. Now, if we go back to IIQ and again click on my access request, we'll see that some of these are being provisioned, some of these are being denied, and if I do have an option to forward these. So again, I can forward to individual user. Let's say maybe forward this to this user. So it's again taken out from my queue, and again I do have an option to forward it to a work group. So I do have a work group called Teams Approval, so I can forward that. Now these requests will be visible on the user who are member of that work group. Now let's go back into IQ and let's see if that. So as you can see, all this is being moved away from IQ into the user to which I forwarded the work item, and again, these are on the team's approval work group. And in terms of audit, if you want to look at audit, so if you look at some of the audit events, uh, you can see the integration shows Microsoft Teams. So it does, shows you the integration channel that's used to approve this work item. So again, yeah, you can create some metrics around that. Now, the integration does have a Teams bot that you can actually use to get some help, get some information. Um, I think this integration piece, I do have some glitches on this integration piece, but but yeah, in case of any glitches, you can definitely review the logs that are on the entity IQ bot server, which will give you some insights on what's happening behind the scene and why the bot is not able to communicate to IQ. Now, uh, now coming back to um, to the troubleshooting tips. So during a couple of integration that I've done, I think one thing as documentation does say that sequence is non-negotiable. So you definitely have to do everything in sequence. Um, and some of these configurations you may or you may not do, because a lot of the configurations are Microsoft Entra side. But again, it does need your involvement if you are troubleshooting the issue. For example, if the port is not open, if the communication is not happening between IIQ to bot server, or connector server to bot, IIQ to bot. So all these definitely needs to be validated, before you actually start testing out the integration. And also, the configuration does needs to be copied exactly as is. Like you there's not a lot of room where you can actually change, let's say, the connector intra SSO proxy URL. Again, if you change, you do need to like redo a lot of configuration. And if you change anything on the Teams application, you do need to update that in the bot service environment variable, and then you do need to restart the bot service. Again, the biggest tip, from or the lesson that I've learned is, just stick to, how the sequence is for this integration. And and I do have a separate integration document that I've created for this integration that I would be happy to share if someone is actually running into an issue or wants to plan to do this integration in future. Um, uh, and if you happen to stick around throughout the presentation, I know I did captured a lot, or I talked about a lot of configuration, um, you know uh, before the demo. But if you stick around, thank you for staying in the presentation, and hope you have learned something from this presentation. Thank you.